All right. Let me know if that is going through okay. Great. Well, I just want to welcome every single person here who is here today. We get to welcome my good friend, Andrea Franklin. She is the Director of Employer Relations and Recruiting here in the Center for Career and Professional Development. And we're so grateful to have her because she's going to talk to us about negotiations in salaries. So I know that this is really, really helpful for all of us, but I know specifically those who are participating in the professional development certificate, this is going to be so, so helpful as you move into your careers. And we just want to welcome Andrea and let you go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thank you, Jessica, and hello, everyone. It's great to be here. As Jessica said, my role is in employer relations here in the Career Center. So I mainly interface with employers who want to come recruit Clemson students. That's really the primary kind of high-level way to describe it. So my team runs a lot of things that you would imagine our employer facing, like career fairs and Clemson Job Link. Hopefully you're using those as resources as you start looking for jobs or even internships as well. So my background actually was in industry. I worked in the healthcare industry for a little over a decade. And then I transitioned into higher education, and I've worked both as a career advisor and then in corporate and employer relations over the last maybe just under 6 years. So in my previous role, previous life, working in industry, I did a lot of kind of the other end of what I help coach students to do now. So helping, we do all kinds of things here in the Career Center, which I'm sure you've learned about. And I did include a couple of resources to just get you started on your career and thinking about negotiating, et cetera. So I'm going to jump in so that we can cover as much as possible. I don't think this will take a full hour. I do additionally have a strong interest in talking to women about the gender pay gap. And so we could possibly get into those slides a little bit if we have time, or it is something that I'm happy to provide either upon request or, Jessica can share those with you. Always happy to have a conversation about that because I think it's really important for us to realize that the gender pay gap still exists. And it's still pretty significant, and especially, can change based on various factors. So it's important to educate folks about this. And I think really when we talk about negotiating, one of the key things is that you should always try, right? And so we don't always talk about that in early career. A lot of times you think you just have to take what you get. And so we're going to talk more about that here. Let me pull my presentation slides up, and then hopefully Zoom will cooperate with me. I think I might have to share screen first. Oh, you have to allow me to share screen, Jessica. Sorry. Sometimes I can't, I don't know, Zoom does funny things if I share screen, or if I try to do presentation mode before I share. Okay, I think I'm good now. So let's see, I'll share my screen and I will pull up my slides. All right, you can see them? You can see my slide? Excellent. So I would also like to say we will definitely have time to ask questions at the end. So you are welcome to throw them in the chat during the presentation. If you're like me, it's always a question of, will I remember what that burning question was by the time you get to the end? So feel free to throw them in the chat and we can address them at the end. And then you can also feel free to unmute and whatnot. So I decided to call this Launching Your Career because I think it's really important for you to understand the details we're going to talk about today before you enter your full-time employment. I'm going to assume, Jessica, am I right in assuming some of these students are probably still thinking about internships? Okay, so There's a lot that you may not know or realize. So we're going to jump into the offer negotiation. I will start by saying that if you are in the internship phase, um, typically we're going to tell you not to negotiate on an internship. So this really is exclusively for when you get that full-time offer, but I still want you to be aware of it because it is important that you know this before. Let's say you start an internship as a junior, you get to the end of that in that summer. A lot of times you're going to get a returning offer before you leave or right when you come back to campus. And so a lot of times what I've seen happen with students is they've already accepted that offer before we really get the chance to talk with them, which is why it's really good that you all are learning about this now so that you can have those conversations without, just accepting that return offer for that full-time work. So we'll jump right in here, as I say. Let's see, be cooperative. There we go. So our agenda for today, we're going to talk about evaluating and negotiating your offer, understanding benefits at some level. We won't do a deep dive, but just give you some definitions at least to understand what they are. And then I've got a couple of our I see a typo, our CCPD resources. So that's the Center for Career and Professional Development. We have a couple of tip sheets. We have a couple of ways that you can schedule appointments with us. So we'll talk about those things as well. So evaluating your offer, what is that $1 million question is really kind of, would you want to do this day after day? So this is some good questions as you consider the particular position that you are looking at. Do you have a good understanding of the job responsibilities and how you'll be spending your time? Making sure that's clear is important. Would the job be challenging, rewarding? Does it fit your long-term goals, at least as far as what you know they are? That will be evolving. So certainly, there's something in the chat, Jessica. I don't know if it's important, but just I see a little red bubble. Okay, and then just want to make sure everybody can hear and see. Okay. Do you like the people that you met and can you see yourself working with them? Is this a good fit for your skills and interest? And then what is the potential for advancement? So these are all really good questions to have in mind as you interview or as you consider the place of employment that you get the offer from, right? So even as you go into interviewing, so let's say you're before the stage of getting that offer, think about, have they answered these questions well for you? And if not, these are some good follow-up things to be clarifying for yourself as you think about the process. So a couple of notes just in general about compensation. It is more than just salary. So what is compensation? It really consists of salary, performance bonus, signing bonus, relocation assistance, stock options. If you're an international student, that visa sponsorship is a big piece and it's expensive. And then there are other perks as well, right? So the worth of your salary really depends on cost of living. So $50K in Clemson is not the same as $50K in California. So a lot of times, students will get these sort of West Coast offers that seem really good and the numbers seem really big, but the cost of living is astronomical. So you have to really compare that salary versus cost of living to know sort of how it stacks up. Don't consider any compensation that's not guaranteed when you determine if you can afford the salary. So bonuses and stock options that are like performance-based or based a lot of times usually based on company performance as well as personal performance. Don't figure those into your budget when you think about that cost of living because they fluctuate. They're not guaranteed. So those should kind of be the icing on the cake, right? Signing bonus and relocation assistance are one-time benefits. So those are going to be something you get up front. While they are helpful and great to have, they are certainly very different than negotiating your base salary. And there's a lot of not only yearly, but kind of long-term benefits to the base salary versus those one-time bonuses that you can get. And as well, they are often taxed. So just something to know, again, to make sure that if they offer you relocation, it's enough to really cover the expenses that you have to relocate, knowing that you probably will be taxed on those. If visa sponsorship is a crucial, benefit for you, then there's a lot you need to understand, the limit around the number of visas, things like that. So making sure you really know what the process is important. And that can vary based on type of visa as well. And then there are kind of those other perks. So getting a company car, travel allowances, etc. So these are just some of the overall things to consider as part of your overall compensation. And I think, well, I do talk a little bit about this later, but normally these are things that are going to come in writing when you get that formal offer in writing. So we're going to talk about waiting for that piece, but just so you know, you won't necessarily know this all up front during the interview process. Maybe oftentimes you may get like a verbal offer up front before you get the offer in writing, and you will not get this full package. That's why it's really important to get that offer in writing with the full package before you say yes to an opportunity. So we're going to go through 10 negotiation guidelines. And number 1, do your research and know your value. There are a lot of ways to do this. So I've just put a couple of here that I think are helpful. We have a first destination survey that you can look at on our website. I don't have the link on here, but it's pretty easy to find if you Google it. With our first destination, that's going to be students who have responded to our survey. That's really where are you going after you graduate. So they will tell us company, location, and then that salary range. So you can get an idea of what other students in similar fields, similar areas, majors are making. NACE has another great resource. They do that national salary data. So NACE is the National Association of Colleges and Employers, and they survey employers as well as students actually for a lot of their data. So that's another great place to look. We can always share that with you if you can't find it. I think some of it you can find on their website, but if you can't find the report, we're always happy to provide that. Salary.com is another good one. There's a lot you can dig into there, so that can be super helpful looking at job titles, etc. And then Glassdoor can also be useful, although I do think you have to log in, and I think you might even have to put like a rating in there about the company that you work for to access it. I'm pretty sure that's how they do it now. But Glassdoor is helpful because you can often look up within the actual company. So not just like other folks at different companies, but folks in that particular company that your offer is from. Sometimes you can find even like similar titles and things. So that can be super helpful. So yeah, these are just some great ways to look at what should you be expecting instead of kind of just picking a number that sounds good to you, really knowing what other folks are offering to make sure that yours is on par where it needs to be. Number 2, never negotiate unless you're willing to commit to the position. So when we think about negotiating, and I do say you always want to try, occasionally you may find out that, hey, we don't negotiate for entry-level positions. And that can be true. I have seen it. It's less common. Like most of the time, even entry-level positions, students will have some success negotiating. And we'll talk about different pieces you can focus on, but I do say never negotiate unless you're willing to commit. So we don't negotiate just to sort of play hardball between one company and another. Really, if I negotiate with you, if you extend an offer to me, now we may not end up coming to an agreement on that, and I may end up turning down a position. So I can give a personal example here. Prior to coming to Clemson, I had an offer from another institution here in South Carolina. I was really excited about the role. I liked the team. I liked the institution. I had every intention of, accepting that position. And in the end, when I got the final offer, it just was not where it needed to be. And even despite my best attempts to negotiate, they had a really firm, as a lot of times state or higher ed institutions will have, they had a really hard cap on the pay band that they had for that position due to equity within their department. And we just could not come to terms. And, that was super disappointing for me. So I did negotiate, and it wasn't successful. So it's not to say that anytime you do negotiate, it's going to work out. It doesn't always, sometimes it's that bottom line just wasn't enough to work for me in this case. But I did do it with, total intent to accept if we could come to terms, right? So that's the idea behind negotiating. Negotiate based on evidence and facts, not personal needs. So when you approach this conversation, you never want to talk about why you need more money personally for your budget to afford, where you want to live, etc. You always really, or even what other people are making. I would always keep it really focused on yourself. So your related experience, and yes, students, you have relatable experience, academic success, scope of experience, demonstrated knowledge and skills. So all of those things, always good to have talking points and be prepared to talk about why you deserve more compensation, but making sure that it's really based on those facts, those skills, not anything personal. Keep the personal stuff out of it. Do we need to pause for any questions, Jessica, or do you feel?
Well, we did have some questions. So I'm wondering, I just told everybody that we'd stop you in a little bit and ask you, we're just going to save up the questions, but if you want, we can take some now.
Well, I just would say if you feel like they're really pertinent to you, I think if we can circle back, that's fine. If you feel it's super,
these are great
okay.
questions. These are
Okay,
really
good.
great comments and questions, but we'll circle back, and that way
All
people
right.
can kind of dig in a little bit deeper.
Okay, that sounds good. Well, we should have plenty of time to talk. So,
we really appreciate y'all commenting in the chat. So
yeah, it's great.
I'll keep touch with all of y'all, and then
Yeah.
we'll save it to the end. And then that way you can really have a
Absolutely.
conversation with Andrea. That's
Yeah,
great.
that sounds good. And, I'm sure we'll wrap up a little bit early and y'all can hang out if you want to talk too. So, okay, number 4. So this one, I know y'all are not going to love probably, but I always recommend negotiating by phone or in person. In person is probably tricky with the types of roles that you all will be getting offered all over the place, right? But you really don't want to do this over email. Now, I have in the past had students have to provide justification via email after having a phone conversation. So that is a possibility, but you always want to try to set up a phone call. And when you set that phone call up, I do not recommend that you say, I'd like to talk about negotiating my salary. So think about it this way. If I email you and I ask you, hey, can I get more money? Okay, not like that, right? But if I essentially email you and try to negotiate, it's much easier for somebody to tell you no. And this is why we recommend a phone call. So I typically recommend once you get that offer in writing, you set up that call. You say, I've got some questions about the offer. When do you have time to talk about it? Set up that call and don't let them know in advance that you plan to negotiate. This way, they're taken a bit by surprise. It's a little bit harder for them to just kind of give you that no that they can give you really easily via email. So it is strategic for you to have this call. I'm just going to tell you it's uncomfortable. And even for somebody like myself who has, 20 years of experience at this point, and I've negotiated probably just about every role that I've had during that time, it doesn't necessarily get easier, but your resolve is definitely stronger. And what I say is, have those talking points ready. I mean, this is the great thing about a phone call. You can literally have yourself essentially like a script. And I do have some scripts, if you'd like those to kind of help you. Of course, you don't want to sound too scripty, but really just have those talking points available and just follow the script, not your feelings, not your nerves. Don't worry about that. This is very normal. And oftentimes, especially for men, unfortunately, ladies, men really are expected to negotiate. And so oftentimes it gives you some credibility to negotiate. So don't be too nervous about it. Number 5, negotiate base salary first whenever possible. So, I mentioned earlier, there are always exceptions, but most companies in general are not going to negotiate more than maybe 10% of that initial offer. So just a good number for you to have in mind. Now, you've already hopefully done that kind of target salary search. Where should you be? Even if the offer comes in high or above that or at the top range of that, I would still recommend negotiating. You definitely have the most power to negotiate up front or when changing positions that you'll ever have. Typically, once you're in a company, getting a promotion or a raise in general is not going to be as significant as when you have that upfront negotiation conversation. So the thing that you want to know going into that role is, hey, I've come in at the top pay that I can. So even if they told me no, even if they said, this is the highest we can give you, here's all the reasons why, I know that I have negotiated and I'm coming in at the best possible place. So you always want to start with that base salary because it is the most beneficial to you in the longevity of your financial health. So not only, is that going to mean next year if you get that cost of living increase or if you get, some kind of bonus and it's based, somewhat on that compensation, or you think about that retirement, like the matching, that would go on, you're going to have more retirement. And overall, the data shows that really it's just going to kind of snowball for you in a positive way for your base to be higher than anything else. So don't go in trying to negotiate anything but the base. I normally say, start with the base up front. That's really going to be your primary. You don't want to try to negotiate too many things and seem greedy. So we really want to focus on what's going to be most important, and that will be that base pay. And then, like I say, consider about 10% being the most that a company is probably going to go. Although there obviously are folks that are out of that typical, but just so you have an idea. Number 6, be willing to give something up to compromise. So make it a win-win. I'll just say, if they were to give you more money on the base instead of like a signing bonus, that would be, again, more beneficial for you. So just thinking about what you might be willing to give up if that came into play. I've not ever had this happen personally, but I think it's always good to think about in advance of a conversation, what you would be willing to give up. And then certainly, if you're not successful negotiating that base, we can always talk about there are other things to focus on, certainly, that are worth negotiating if the base is not movable. And number 7, carefully select your words. So when you go into this conversation, I just want you to be really thoughtful about the way that you talk about it. So a lot of times I think when we think about a conversation like negotiation, we think of it almost like a confrontation, like this is going to be a confrontation. And that's not true. This is a conversation. I want you to think about gratitude when you go into this conversation. So saying, hey, I'm really grateful for this offer. I'm really excited about the potential of working with this team. You can say nice things that are genuine. And then you might say, I was surprised by, the base salary being blah, blah, blah versus disappointed, or I'm excited by the opportunity over something like I'm excited by the offer. So just being really careful about the way that you talk about these things is really important and will go a long way for the relationship that you're building there. So just keep those words in mind and be really thoughtful about the way that you talk about it. And again, we can share some scripts with you that will help with that piece as well. So number 8, if you have multiple offers, I don't ever recommend mentioning specific offers. So focus on offers in the same industry or job function, but ideally not sharing details of an offer with another company unless you are specifically asked to do so. Now, I want to be careful about how I phrase this. So they may casually ask you to share details. That is not the same thing as saying, hey, we have to see that offer in writing in order to be able to negotiate. And that does happen. So there are some companies out there. I'm going to give an example of a student I worked with. She was a computer science student. She had an offer from Facebook and from Twitter. And I think it was Facebook she was wanting to negotiate with, and her Twitter offer was higher. And they actually did, it could be the other way around. I can't remember, but it's been a minute. But basically, the company said, hey, we don't normally negotiate on entry level, but because you have this other offer, we're willing to work with you, but we would need to see that offer in writing. So meaning I'm not bluffing, there is a real offer that exists here. It is higher than the one you're making me. So in that case, she did share the details of the offer. Might be worth considering if there's certain details you need to redact in order to share that. So some things you may want to black out depending on what they're requiring. We would always be happy to talk that process through with you to make sure that this is something good to do. I try to be careful because obviously, the offer that a company makes you really is like a proprietary information, right? They're sharing a lot of details with you about internal things within their company, especially when you're talking about, two companies who obviously are competitors in a way. You just want to be thoughtful and careful about how you share it. But if it is necessary to negotiate, then finding out what would be acceptable to share, what do they really have to know in order to negotiate with you. But generally, as a general rule, don't say, I have an offer from Itron for 75,000. Are you able to negotiate? We don't want to be that upfront with what that other offer is. And this one's really important. And I think often we don't talk about this enough. And I know it's really tricky as a student. So I want to say, never renege on an offer if you've already accepted it. So when you go into these negotiations and you accept an offer, especially these returning offers are tricky because they happen so early. You may have that returning offer before you even come back to campus your senior year, let's say, or for master students as well, that right at the end of your time. And that heavy recruiting happens here in the fall. So what we don't want you to do is come back in the fall after already accepting this offer and then continue to recruit on campus. But I do know there are sometimes exceptions. If you've got circumstances that are outside of your control, as a change in location, a company merger, downsizing, or something going on with your family, totally understand that. And I would, in those cases, be as communicative as you feel comfortable with the company, letting them know your reasoning, because oftentimes, I have had students renege on an offer and let them know, hey, I got a better offer from somebody else. Please don't do that. So really, when you accept an offer, consider it, this is your word, you've committed, you've said yes. Now, this is not a yes for life. You don't have to work for that company forever. The average person keeps their first job 1 to 3 years. So just know that this is just the first job. It doesn't have to be your dream job. It's probably not your dream job, even if you think that it is. That career path is really a constantly evolving, changing, very rarely a straight path kind of a journey. So just know, if you've said yes, then you should stop interviewing, you should stop applying to other companies, and you should be committed to the one that you've agreed to work for. If you're not sure, then I also want to say this. Don't say yes if you're not sure. I know it feels scary maybe to go into that last year not having that offer accepted, or maybe you feel like I'm not going to get another offer. If this does not feel like the right experience for you, the right team or employer for you, please don't say yes if it doesn't feel like the right thing. Don't do it just because you're fearful. We'd be happy to talk with you about recruiting, about the best strategies, help you with your job search process. And I would definitely encourage you to be discriminating. If there's some red flags there, pay attention to those things. And don't say yes, if it just doesn't feel right, rather than saying yes and then continuing to interview and trying to find something better. And then finally, start the process at least 3 to 4 days before the offer deadline. So don't wait till the very last day. If you've got a hard deadline on your offer, make sure that you start this process a couple of days before. It will often take employers a couple of days to get back to you, and you do want that new salary in writing before you say yes. So you'll want enough time to make sure, or let's say you're working with an HR professional, they've got to go back and get permission from a supervisor before they can say yes. Like sometimes there are just several steps or phases to getting these things done. So don't wait too long. We never want to let that offer expire. So that's just something for you to know. And sometimes deadlines do get tight, and, I understand that, but to the best of your ability, give yourself a couple of days. And then a couple of things I put in here, since hopefully you'll get these slides. We've got a couple of tip sheets that I thought might be helpful, things to consider. And then additionally, you can schedule with us. I'm sure that you've been told this many times, but make an appointment with us. We can not only help you with job search or interviewing practice, but we can talk about offer negotiation. So we can help you prepare to negotiate and have that conversation. We can also help evaluate offers for you. So we certainly can help you take a look at that total compensation package and all of the things that come along with it. And even kind of give you a gauge as to, yeah, that seems normal, or that's a little bit odd, etc. Okay, I'm going to leave time for questions here. And I know there are a bunch in the chat, so I will
Good
stop
one.
my
Good one. Good
slideshow. End my screen share.
Yes. Andrea, would it be great if I just went ahead and read?
Yeah, do you want to just ask me? And then also, as I say, once we get through these, I'm happy to hang out and chat if you guys have more specific questions.
Awesome. Okay, so Jennifer Cornell said that she is going through a career change after 20 years and does not want a beginning salary. What would you say to that, Andrea?
Yeah, well, good for you, Jennifer. First of all, I feel like I did a similar thing, and it can be tricky. I think what you really want to focus on, and I don't know what type of career change you're talking about, like how significant, but what I did when I transitioned from industry into higher ed, I did take a pay cut because higher ed in general does pay less than industry, but I did really focus on my transferable skills. So, not saying, hey, I'm brand new in my career, but I have all of these skills that are transferable that I'm going to bring in, even though there will be a learning curve and institutional knowledge that I don't have. When I made that transition, I talked about doing all of these things on the other side and how I can use those. That other side kind of perspective to help the work that I was doing with students. So I think really making the case for how is your previous experience going to help you come in and be ready to get to work in your new role.
Jennifer, did you want to say anything specific to Andrea? She said,
No,
thanks.
that
Oh, go ahead.
no,
Go ahead.
that's good.
And
Great.
again, we're always happy to talk more in depth about your situation because I know these things can be really unique and individual. So, but good for you. I think that's great.
Chanlin Ann says, would you consider benefits a part of your compensation, like health care, et cetera? Maybe disability, life insurance.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So that is a part of your total compensation package. So certainly is a whole consideration for the offer. And when we talk about negotiating, it's really focusing on that base pay. A lot of those pieces are not negotiable, but if you, for example, don't get healthcare included, which I mean, I can't even imagine that there are many roles out there now that don't have that, but let's just say you didn't get something really specific, that might be an opportunity as well to negotiate to be paid more. So if you're not getting that 401k match or something like that, those could be things that you might use to try to negotiate or try to ask for. I wouldn't imagine you'll really run into that too much unless it's a much smaller company. But then oftentimes what I've had folks do in the past is they'll pay me more money to compensate for the fact that they're not including X. So yeah, but it definitely is part of the compensation.
That's great. Jennifer Cornell also said that was asking, is there a dollar value resource we can know for point 3? Your point 3 had to do with, I believe, competencies and knowing your worth, being able to argue that. Do we have resources? I mentioned that we have several resources on our website to know, what are you offering? I think that's where you're going, right, Jennifer? Like what are those transferable skills we have that we could transfer into monetary value? Like what salary?
Okay,
can we
so
expect?
yeah, so the one slide I think I talked about a few places you can look at sort of national data or company wide or industry wide. So I think that's one way to just know, hey, is this offer on par for other folks in the industry or other similar type roles? If you're talking about your own skills and how do I monetize like my personal skills, I think it's really looking at the job description and what you're being asked to do, and then think about your resume and kind of like, how does your resume prepare you for that role and the things that are being asked of you. And so having those talking points of that kind of transferable piece, I think is really, like I say, for me, I wore an HR hat in my previous roles because I just did a lot of different things in operations management, et cetera. So I was able to talk about all the things that I did in that capacity that have really trained me to work in career services. So you just want to think about how those things line up. And so you're bringing that knowledge to the table. And for students, if you are interning with a company, and they're making a return offer for you, for example, or maybe you were just in a similar industry, you had that summer of internship experience where you got to know some of those systems, you have some of that training already under your belt. So you're going to come in that much more prepared for the role than somebody who didn't intern there or somebody who has never interned in that industry. Or if you were super involved in a really relevant student organization, you can talk about how those things are relevant to the work that you'll be doing.
Also, we have some resources on our website that you can look at by city, how much it costs to live in each of those
Yeah.
cities and kind of compare your experience. There's like a little scale that says like, are you at this level, in your experience, and what you can expect to be paid based on the location that you're living in. So that's great too.
And cost of living calculators. Are those in there too, Jessica? I know that's kind of what you're talking about, but that actually sounds slightly different. But even even to compare, if you're going to be moving, what does 50K in Clemson look like in San Diego? Not much, but yes. Okay,
We
continue.
have another question. Alok Kumar asked, what if they're asking for a response to an offer by email? How should we request them to have a conversation on the phone?
Yeah, and if you mean they made you an offer via email and they're asking you to accept, I would still try to set that phone call up. So I would just say, I'm excited about this opportunity. I have some questions about the offer. Can we set up a time to have a phone call? And just that simple. You don't have to say too much. I think a lot of times, especially when you feel nervous or a little bit uncomfortable, you might think you have to say a lot, but you really don't. So did you want to clarify something on that? Or is that
Yeah,
good?
no, I was thinking of a step ahead of that. Let's suppose we have had conversation on phone, and let's suppose if I begin to talk some bits of negotiation,
Yeah.
and if they just simply respond that I may send my details and things regarding that
Yeah.
on email. So how do I request them, or keep it so polite that okay, I want to do it more on the phone or something like that?
So if you had a phone call and they've asked you to put your request in writing, basically, is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's okay to do then, because you've already attempted or had that, and I've seen that before, where they need the request in writing so that they can actually kind of shoot it up the ladder to whoever needs to see it. And so we didn't get too much into like when you talk about you can really get deep into kind of scripting, right? But I would just keep it vague and make the request without getting too specific. And again, like we're always happy to review an email before you send it. So get something together, make an appointment, let us take a look, and we'd be happy to help you structure that in a way that's going to hopefully benefit you the most.
Okay, great.
But it's okay to do that if they've asked for it. And I have seen that happen sometimes. So no problem.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Great. All right. And then Farnaz Kamyab says, it might be a little off topic, but what would you say when you need to get a possible offer in short time because you have to decide between two options and you have limited time?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It happens quite often, actually. So I would say if you are interviewing and someone has said, an offer is coming, or even if you're just trying to follow up because they're taking a long time, I would always recommend that you go back to them and say, and you can do this via email, I'm really excited about this opportunity. This is my number one choice. I do have another offer with a tight deadline, and you don't have to give more details than that, but just letting them know, I've got an offer with a tight deadline, and, would love to know what your timeline looks like or what next steps are, kind of depending what the situation is. But yeah, absolutely let them know and use that as a strategy to get them to respond more quickly.
All right. And we have Abby Johnson who said, if a company offers you a return, but you want to keep scoping out other companies, how do you let them know you are unsure without losing them as a company offer?
Yeah, that's a good question, Abby. So I think the key, and again, happens quite often with students. So sometimes you're going to get into a really tricky situation with these. One is because a returning offer, they are often going to intentionally give you a tight deadline in order to try to get you to commit. And so it's possible that if you don't feel that this is really ideal, that you're not going to be able to negotiate this as far out as you would need to, but always try. So what I would say is go back to them and never tell them straight up, hey, I want to keep looking. I'm not sure about this offer. Okay. I mean, you'd be surprised. Students do that. They're very honest. Don't be that honest. So I want you to say to them, I've had a really great experience. Thank you so much for this offer. This is a big decision for me, and I need a little more time to decide. And so really asking them for an extension is the best thing that you can do in that case. The tricky thing is, if they give you an extension, oftentimes that's still only going to be a couple of weeks, maybe a month if you're lucky. Occasionally, you may get a company who's very flexible with you. Most of the time, it's going to be really tricky for you to continue to interview, knowing that process probably will take a couple of months with a new company. But one thing you can do is kind of going back to that last question. If you're interviewing with somebody who you're very interested in, and you've got this other returning offer over here, but say I'm interviewing here, company A, you've said, hey, I need a little more time. Company B, this is really what you want, but you're just in round one. You could let them know. I wouldn't do it maybe right up front. You got to kind of feel it out, but maybe even in person, if you're there for an interview, or if they give you time for questions, you could say, hey, I just want to let you know, I'm very interested in this opportunity. I do have another offer on the table with a deadline of X. So you could let them know. And I have seen companies really try to speed up their process for students because they really are interested in you. So if you feel that you have that really exciting opportunity and they're kind of has that mutual energy is there, then yeah, find the right time and the right way to let them know that you have this other offer and see if there's anything they can do to speed their process up. Sometimes they will do that.
Thank you. Alec also said sometimes companies back out from their offers, and that's puts you in a precarious situation to depend on one offer. What would you suggest?
That's not very common. We've seen it happen, in more of the recession kind of time or with COVID. For a lot of companies, COVID was very profitable. There were some industries that were really hurt by it. And I would say most students that I worked with did not lose offers. It does happen sometimes. And really, there's nothing you can do about that. It doesn't mean, you can give feedback. You can certainly tell your friends, hey, this was a really disappointing situation. You can let us know. We're always glad to know when that's happening, to make sure that they're not still actively recruiting on our campus while rescinding offers from students. But, it is a bit of a risk, but I would say it's a pretty low risk because we don't see it happen too often. So the thing to consider up front is really, so here's a good example. We have a employer who's been recruiting on our campus, have not had any issues with offers being rescinded, but they really started expressing interest right after their company had a huge layoff. And so I think what happened is they've shifted their strategy, I'm sure, to try to save money. It's a cool company. A lot of people want to work there. I think they've laid off a lot of upper level kind of salary heavy employees, and they've shifted to let's bring in more entry level because we can save money, get that kind of fresh talent. So it doesn't mean that, their offer to you won't be stable, but I do think you need to do your research before you interview, before you accept an offer. And if it is an area or a company that kind of sits on some shaky ground, I would be asking those questions before you say yes. And or when you go to accept that offer, you have to know, like, hey, I'm taking a bit of a risk here. Is it really worth it? And you've got to make that determination.
That's great. Rishab Chopara says, is it advisable to ask about visa sponsorship during the internship offer itself?
So hopefully you know that up front, Rashab. I would hope that if they're interviewing you, that you've filled out an application and that they've asked that question to you. If you mean during like recruiting, when you're talking to employers, like absolutely you can have a conversation about sponsorship. That is a completely legitimate and should be a deal breaker for you. I would also say most employers are going to let you know in the job description whether or not they will sponsor. But the one piece that gets tricky there is if you're in like a STEM field, for example, a lot of times employers will say on their general applications that they don't sponsor. But then when it comes to a really specialized role, or if you're a master's or a PhD student with really specific experience, they will sponsor for some particular roles. So it's always worth asking. I would ask up front. And I would say normally by the time you've filled out that application and gone through the interview, hopefully this has already been addressed by the employer. So if you don't know when you get an offer, that would be a really critical piece of information. So yes, please ask. And I see someone has their hand raised as well.
Perfect timing.
Yes. Okay, great.
I think it's Ayodeji Peter.
Yes. Thank you very much, Jessica, and thank you so much, Andrea, for that wonderful piece of work. So nice to hear from your wealth of knowledge and experience. I do have a couple of questions, and you've touched some of them, but I think I'll ask maybe one or two questions. First, as a student or as an international student interviewing, and then you've put out a couple of applications, and out of all the applications, only one of them returned like positive. Others are still waiting due to some internal arrangements. And then, so my first question is, how soon do you respond or do you accept an offer from any company? That's the first question. Then second question is, couple of days ago, I had some conversation with Alexa Newsom, sharing my experience. I came from Japan, and then I got a job before coming to the US, and it was during COVID. So this is talking about having a phone conversation, negotiating the salary. So I had this Skype interview with this guy, and then he brought up the salary thing, and we had that discussion back and forth, and eventually we settled for a particular amount. And that was via the Skype interview. And in the end, when the offer came out, all the details and every other thing that was from the basis of our discussion was not included in the offer. And so that's in that kind of situation. And there's another company also. So I had to like, hey, we had this discussion during the interview, but these things are not, the details are not part of the offer coming.
Yeah.
So how do you address situations like that?
Yeah, that would be concerning to me. So if they're making you an offer in writing, but it doesn't include a lot of the things you talked about or you discussed, I would go back and ask for those. And that may be something where, because you've already done the negotiating, we're not talking about the actual negotiation piece. It would be perfectly appropriate for you to email in that instance, and go ahead and email back and say, thank you so much for this offer. I'm excited about it. And then say, there are a couple of details from our conversation that are not included in the offer that I would need to see in writing before I would be able to accept. you could list what those are. Say, here's the things that are missing. If you'd be able to provide that in writing, I'd be ready to accept right away. If that's, of course, where you're at with it. But it would be perfectly appropriate for you to ask. And I would certainly recommend that you always get those things in writing. Don't ever go off of a verbal. Always have that in writing before you commit.
Oh, thank you so much. I do make reference to because the interview was recorded. I do make reference to the interview, and then I guess the other guy, the other recruit, the HR guy who took up the employment thing was like, oh, during your interview, the person you spoke with was so excited about your CV, your experience, and he just had to like agree to some of those terms while that was not part of the company's strategy and was not part of the company's salary scale, things like that. So that issues, and then so just talking about having the conversation on phone rather than in writing. That's
right. Well, first of all, that would be a big red flag to me for that company, that someone will offer that to you and either not have the permission, or basically they're going back on what they promised you. So I would be very concerned about that. There's no reason why having the conversation on the phone means that they shouldn't be able to back it up in writing. I mean, they said that they would, and they haven't. And so that sounds like an internal problem that should concern you. You still did the right thing.
Thank you very much. What about the second question? How soon do you accept an offer from a company, considering you put out a lot of applications?
Well, that is really up to the opportunity. So it's like, is this the opportunity you really want? Is it very exciting to you? Does it align with, where you think you're headed? I mean, as best you know at this point, is it going to give you the skills that you want to move in the trajectory that you feel your career path is going? And then if the answer is like, okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, this is like a 5 or a 6, then maybe you want to ask for that extension and continue to do some looking. Or sometimes what will happen is maybe you're in the process of interviewing with 2 companies and one makes you an offer and you're still interviewing with a second company. Then again, ask for that extension, go back to the other company and say, hey, I'm really excited about this potential, but I do have this other offer that has a tight deadline. And so that often could help speed things up. But I really think that's a personal decision. It's really about whether or not this feels like the right offer for you to accept at this time.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Well, thank you so much, Andrea. We're going to wrap up. I just wanted to say to everybody who's on, please know that we're here for you. We are here at the Center for Career and Professional Development. We're in the Hendricks Student Center on the 3rd floor. So if you want to come up in person, or if you want to make an appointment with one of our counselors, we're here to answer all kinds of questions. So especially Andrea, thank you so much for coming today and sharing your wisdom. And just so that y'all know, we are here for you. So if you have follow-up questions or want to make an appointment, please reach out through our website.
And Jessica, you can share my slides, so I'll provide those. And also, if anyone wants to email me follow-up questions, I'm happy to answer those as well, if we didn't get to your question, or maybe something comes up as you marinate on all these wonderful things. Thanks, y'all. Thanks, Jessica.
Thank you so much, everybody.